I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Sports Science and Yoga, and also at the School of Biological Science of this institute, Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda Educational and Research Institute. So today I will talk about effect of meditation practices on human brain structure and function. So in this presentation, I will basically report the results from studies published previously by other groups. So I am basically neuroscientist, and I use computational brain imaging methods to characterize different brain diseases. So, but today I will be talking about the effect of meditation on human brain structure and function. So, with this, I'll start my talk. So, here in this slide, you can see the human brain from different views. So, you can see the human brain from different views. So, from the as you can see the panel at the bottom, you can see the brain, how it looks from, if you look at it from the left side, and if you can see the brain from the right hand side. So, and in the upper panel, on the figure on the right hand side shows the view of the human brain if you look at it from the top. And on the left side in the upper panel, you can see the view of the brain if you look at it from the below. So, because of the invention of different non-invasive brain imaging method, non-invasive means we do not need to open the brain to study the structure and function. So those kind of technique we use, and probably you have heard about MRI, magnetic resonance imaging. So magnetic resonance imaging based methods basically revolutionized the neuroscience research, because we can study the live human brain and we can see how the brain changes in different diseases and how the training alters different parameters of brain. So, but unfortunately, although the previous research has generated new details, new understanding of the brain, but our understanding regarding the structure function of the brain is still limited. So we are still learning, and neuroimaging studies has accelerated the neuroscience research in the context of human brain imaging. So as I was talking about the non-invasive neuroimaging, so here on the left-hand side, you can see the one brain where I have written human brain. So this was reconstructed from an MRI image. So you can see the human brain can be seen in great details, but maybe not at the details of microscope, but still, without opening the brain, we can see many details out of the brain. I mean, here I am referring to the structural aspects of human brain. And in the next figure, so you can see different colored patches in the brain. Those are basically pseudo colors. So those each colored regions, colored patches are called basically brain regions. Okay. So we have many brain regions. Okay. And those brain regions talks with each other, communicates with each other using electrical signal. So how that communication happens between different brain regions. On the right hand side, you can see neural pathways of the brain. So they use those pathways. Those brain regions use those pathways to communicate with each other using those neural pathways. So all regions are not connected to all regions. So basically some regions are connected with some other specific regions. So as if you can think like the railway system, we know that all trains do not stop at all stoppages. So some trains do that, local trains, but we have some trains who runs long distance. So they not necessarily stop at every station. So you can have the analogy of that when I say that all regions are not connected with all regions. So each region is connected with some specific set of regions, and those connection happens through those neural pathways of the brain. So you can think them as a wire. So if you take another analogy, so if we know the electric line, so those neural pathways are electric lines, and the poles you see, which are connected with each other by those wires. So if you may consider those poles as human brain regions. Okay, so this is the very basic preliminary idea about brain structure. So another way we can talk about different structural aspects of the brain, and that is we can invoke the notions of like gray matter and white matter. So we may have heard about the cells. There are cells. So specifically when we talk about brain, we mainly talk about some specific type of cells. Banglaয় যাকে বলে কোষ, সেই specific type of cells are known as neuron. Of course, there are other type of cells in the human brain, but mostly we study the neurons. Now, advanced research is going on on characterizing other type of cells and etc. etc. So based on this, we can divide the brain in roughly 2 or 3 segments. So three segments actually. So one is gray matter, the second is white matter, and the third is cerebrospinal fluid. So you can understand cerebrospinal fluid will be some kind of liquid. So whole brain is immersed into that. And here you can see that gray patch in the second figure, okay, on the right hand side. So that is that ribbon-like structure, gray ribbon-like structure. It is called gray matter. So they basically contains the body of the cells. And we know, if we very simple way, we talk the structure of the neurons. So they have cell body and they have some long section which is known as axon. So those axons you will find them in the white matter as shown with that initials WN, white matter. So we have white matter, gray matter, and cerebrospinal fluid. So when we will talk about the brain structure today, I will mainly talk about those gray matter and white matter. So as you can see in gray matter, that ribbon-like structure, gray ribbon-like structures, there are many layers in them. So there are basically different cellular layers. So in each layers, different type of cells are there. Okay. So here you can see 6 layers, cellular layers in that gray ribbon-like structures. And another way we can think about describe brain, the cortex and subcortex. So what is cortex? It is the topmost part of our brain. Okay. And the other structure which are at the bottom or at the below the cortex, those are called subcortex. Okay. So with this, so when today I will talk about the effect of on gray matter and white matter. So basically we'll be repeatedly use this term. So this is basically introduction to that. So this structure, so earlier before the discovery of MRI, what we used to do, people used to do, they used to do post-mortem brain and use different staining methods, histological methods to study different structural aspects. But after the invention of this non-invasive brain imaging methods, so now without opening the brain, even in the live human brain, we can study the structure in some details. So on the left-hand side, you can see one MRI scanner. So people generally lies down on that table and the table goes inside, and the round thing you can see, that is basically an electromagnet. So using different techniques, we can get different types of brain image. We can study the brain structure, different aspects of brain structure, brain function, and many more things. But today I will be mainly talk about the brain structure and functions. So you remember that I talked about the brain areas here, human brain regions or anatomical regions and brain areas. So if I want to know different patches, how big they are, how thick they are, because here you can see the gray ribbon, they have certain thickness, and it is not necessarily uniform everywhere. And you can see that different colored patches, their size are also are not equal, and they also have volume, those are also not equal. So different structures, different regions have heterogeneous structures. So what happens when we study some effect of disease or the effect of practice or training or whatever? So what we can study how those regions, the volume, surface area, or the thickness of the regions changes. So that gives us some basic idea how the process is working on brain. So on the right hand side, you can see some zoomed version of this MRI image, which where if you look carefully, you will see one yellow line and there is another red line. Okay, so the distance between these two lines will determine the thickness of gray matter. So that part, the region contained between these two lines, those are the gray matter regions. Okay, and on the left hand side of the yellow line or the below yellow line, so that part is more whitish. So that is the white matter. So between those yellow line and red line, we can study thickness. We can find out what is the area of that regions, what is the volume of the regions, and you can see those different structures, they are curved. So we can study the curvatures and many different parameters. So once we have these brain images like this here you are seeing, so we can use different image processing methods to find out those two boundaries, like the yellow line and the white and the red line. Then after using some computational stage, you can find out those volume, area, thickness, curvature, and all those parameters. So these are very important parameters, because what we do, we check how these parameters are changing in different conditions. So this is one aspect. Now, earlier I talked that different brain regions talk with each other or communicate with each other using these neural pathways. So can we study those neural pathways non-invasively without opening the brain in live human brain? Can we do that? Yes, we can do that using a specialized MRI imaging method, which is called diffusion tensor imaging. So the diffusion tensor, basically most of the content of our body is water, approximately 70% it is water. So different magnetic pulse are given to the different area throughout the whole brain, and different small element called voxels. Within that, we study how the water molecules are diffusing when you are giving magnetic pulse. So using that, we can study the directions of the organization of those neural pathways or white matter fibers, which different regions use to communicate with each other. So here you can see those white matter pathways or neuronal pathways from different views. Okay, so on the left hand side, if you look at the brain, and if some magically I remove all the gray matter, And if you want to see the white matter, it will look like that. So this was generated without opening the brain using a MRI method, specialized MRI method called diffusion tensor imaging. So here you can see different colors. Those are basically pseudo colors. So those green fibers, green pathways, they basically run front to back and back to front. Okay. And the red fibers, you can see, though they basically connect to the left hemisphere and right hemisphere of our brain. So what is the left hemisphere and right hemisphere of the brain? So in the first slide, in the first panel, the topmost panel, and on the right hand side, you can see a perpendicular division. Some structure is on the left side and some structure is on the right side. So the structure on the left hand side is called left hemisphere and the right side is called right hemisphere. So these two regions communicate with each other using those red fibers. Okay, because when we execute different behaviors, we need the help of brain. So the brain help us to execute different behavior by communicating between different regions. So when some structure from the left hemisphere and right hemisphere need to communicate, they use these specialized fibers which were shown in red pseudo color. So now if you look these pathways from the sideways, so then you will see then you will have this kind of view which is shown in the middle. And on the right hand side, so if you look at me directly face to face, so then you will have this kind of view, the image shown on the right hand side. So here you can very nicely see those blue colored fibers. Of course, these are pseudo colors, and these fibers basically run top to bottom and bottom to up directions. So the big fiber Y-like structure, blue colored, you can see those are basically known as corticospinal tract. And on the left hand side, the first image I described, so the green structure are there. There are many tracts in that bundle. So one of them is longitudinal fasciculus, so the biggest one. So we can study these fibers, I mean, this pathway is also non-invasively. So if some disease happens, how these communication channels get affected, or some other property, structural properties of those communication channels or neuronal pathways get affected, we can study in live human brain without opening it. So in today's topic also, I will talk how this structure, this communication channels, white matter pathways or neuronal pathways changes. So this is the summary of whatever I said so far in some sense. So here you can see the brain, the entire brain. So the transparent part, so the gray matter is shown as a transparent matter, and inside you will see an yellow colored substance. That is basically neuronal pathways or white matter pathways. So I said different regions of the brain communicate with each other using electrical signals. So here it is a simulation that how the communication is happening inside the brain between different areas, and why they need to communicate, different areas need to communicate. Because they communicated, that's why we can maintain our brain function. So what is function, I will talk in the next slide, but why do you need to study the function? So these communications through different white matter channels or white matter pathways or neuronal pathways help us to execute brain function, and those brain functions supports our behavior. So that's why as brain function supports our behavior, so structure supports function, function supports behavior, if we think that way. So if we want to understand the effect of training or effect of disease on brain, then we need to understand the structure, and we also need to understand the function. Okay, then we'll have some kind of idea how the process probably occurring. So if you are giving training, probably you are seeing some my behavior is improving, some kind of behavior, some aspect of my behavior is improving. Then why that behavior improved or deteriorated? So the thing in neuroscience will say that it happened because the modification of brain structure and function. So I talked about the different gray matter parameters, thickness, surface, and all those things. And I also talked about those white matter fibers or neuronal pathways, as here you can see with that yellow structure symbolizes that. So how those things are changing. And also we can see how the functions are changing. And I have already mentioned that it is very important to know how functions are changing because that supports our behavior. So if we can understand how the structure and function changing, so then that will bridge the gap between some the protocol, the training protocol or disease, how those are affecting our behavior. So between these two, some training or disease and change in behavior, so we have this brain structure and function. So neuroscience studies that. So I was repeatedly mentioned function. So using a specific MRI method called functional magnetic resonance imaging, we can indirectly estimate the brain functional activity. So I mentioned some specific type of cells, neurons. So when we do a specific task or job, what happens that some specific regions are associated with them. So what happens, those neurons in those specific brain regions, they get activated, or we say in neuroscience, they start firing. So what happens? So for activation of those areas or activation of those neurons or firing of those neurons, we need energy. We need to perform metabolism. So there is a metabolic demand. So to perform metabolism, we need oxygen. So how do we get that oxygen? Through blood flow. So there are many blood streams inside the brain. So the blood brings the oxygen. And what happens? So they bring the oxygenated hemoglobin in blood. So those oxygenated hemoglobin from hemoglobin, the different brain regions extract the oxygen, and what happens? The hemoglobin, oxygenated hemoglobin, become deoxygenated hemoglobins. As this conversion happens, so basically we get some diamagnetic material. So what we get ultimately, that some diamagnetic material getting transformed into paramagnetic material. And as we have kept the brain is inside the scanner, so there is some signal change we can detect, which is called blood oxygen level dependent signals. So more neuronal activity or more activity of an area, then you get this more higher values of that fMRI signal. So using this fMRI technique, we can study brain function. So today we'll talk about the meditation. So basically, this is practice of concentration can be oriented towards the concentration of attention on external or mental object while ignoring all irrelevant stimuli, which could be said that it could be categorized as focused attention, or toward techniques that try to enlarge the attentional focus to all incoming sensations, emotions, and thoughts from moment to moment without focusing on any of them. Like watch, so you can broadly categorize them as watching the mind. Or this kind of meditation technique may involve both procedures. So this is very brief overview of that. So many groups have performed research on this meditation trainings, different paradigms they have used, and more or less consistently we have found that they have reported that in two specific domain of our behavior or the cognition or emotion, we can see changes. So those are attention and emotional regulation. So what kind of change we see in the context of attention? So here what happens, the span of attention increases. This has been reported again and again. And what happened, also that our reaction time goes down. So we can quickly react. So if I am doing something, if you give some other information, I will be quickly able to react to that. So this is called reaction time. So that also improves. That means it becomes shorter. So this has been proved again and again. And another aspect also widely reported, that emotional regulation, one particular aspect of emotional regulation has been reported again and again. So that is called pro-social behavior. So socially, I will be better. So I will be better connecting with you. I will be better way I will behave with you in the social context. So we have some kind of understanding that if somebody performs this practice, so some kind of attentional, in the context of attention, there will be some improvement. In the context of emotional regulation, there will be some improvement. But here, what is missing? So what brain is doing? So, and how the brain is changing so that this kind of improvement is happening. So, next slide. Okay. So many studies are performed on human brain, the structure and function changes associated with meditation. So here I am reporting some studies performed by a group in the University of Rome Sapienza. So they basically performed a meta-analysis. Meta-analysis, basically they summarize the studies performed earlier, and they tried to find out which brain areas are consistently changed across different types of meditation, and or they were claimed as meditation practice. So this selection was done by that group only, and this paper which I have mentioned here, this Bossia et al. 2014. So here, so they used different types of criteria to select which study to include in meta-analysis or not. So number of participants. So how many subjects, human subjects were involved in that study, that was also a very important factor. And whether the neuroimaging processes were done in acceptable manner, that was also another criteria. And whether the relevant statistics they used to come to the conclusion whether those are acceptable. So they found these studies which satisfied those technical criteria. So here the criteria was not on the process, which type of training process they are going on, rather on the technical aspect. So they selected these papers based on those criteria, and they have mentioned basically 4 types of meditation techniques which use large number of subjects relatively. So those are called brainwave vibration, so which is more popular in southern part of Korea, South Korea. And the second one is popular, the Tai Chi. It is popular in China. And mindfulness meditation and the loving kindness meditation, those are originated in USA and popular in USA. So I am not saying that whether that these are the only meditation practices, or whether you will agree or disagree whether these are the meditation practice or not. So of course there are other techniques which are not included in these studies because unfortunately they did not satisfy those technical criteria which I mentioned earlier. Okay, so as Maharaj suggested, of course, then as those processes here, you can see they have different names and they are practicing different, more commonly practiced different part of the world, but they have some kind of similarity with Ashtanga yoga based meditation techniques. Well, of course, I'm a neuroscientist. I'm not at all an expert on meditation. So here you can see the brain structure and some yellow blobs. So those yellow blobs, so these brain regions are where they have observed in different type of meditation practices or different type of those practices, the brain volume increases consistently. Okay, so they are like middle and in some of the areas on the left hemisphere, some of the brain regions were on the right hemisphere. So name of those regions are called middle and frontal, medial frontal gyrus, middle frontal gyrus, precuneus, fusiform gyrus, anterior cingulate cortex, and thalamus. So here you can see some structures like medial frontal gyrus, precuneus, and anterior cingulate cortex. So they are part of a specialized network which is called default mode network. So they are connected with each other, different regions are connected with each other, and they are involved in different internal attention related processes. So some way here we can understand that as these practices often talk about the regulating attention and all those things, so some way this area consistently was in where we saw they found consistently volume increase of the gray matter. So that probably goes well with that understanding expectation. So the increased gray matter volume in the anterior cingulate cortex of meditators. So here the comparisons were done between the meditators and the people who had no experience of meditation. So the increased gray matter volume in the anterior cingulate cortex of meditators supports the improvement of self-regulation, self-control, focused problem solving, and adaptive behavioral response under changing conditions, which are strictly associated with the functioning of the anterior cingulate cortex. Basically, this anterior cingulate cortex, a specific brain area, it is already known they are involved into this kind of functions like self-regulation, self-control, focused problem solving, adaptive behavioral responses. So basically here they are trying to infer that, okay, that this area we have seen the volume has increased. So this kind of practice also involve probably help us to improve self-regulation, self-control, and better perform focused problem solving and adaptive, and make us more adaptive under changing conditions. Furthermore, the anterior and that region I mentioned, that anterior cingulate cortex, has recently been proposed to mediate the positive effects of these techniques on pro-social behavior. So I earlier talked about this pro-social behavior in the context of emotional regulation. So here we know that some kind of emotional regulation enhances like pro-social behavior. So the changes here we are seeing that they have seen that anterior cingulate cortex already known that it helps us to maintain better pro-social behavior. However, here they have compared basically meditators versus non-meditators, but they did not recruited like novice, and they did not train them. So no before or after study, like before starting the practice of meditation, you do MRI scan, and after training them, then you do MRI scan. If you see changes in that case, you will be able to see that, okay, meditation changed that. So there will be always some nagging questions, whether the changes they reported, whether those are due to meditation or those person already had those changed brain radiation, brain volumes. So that's why probably they are predisposed to perform this kind of meditation or indulge into this kind of practices. So now another important aspect is that, so earlier I talked about how the brain volume increases in meditators. I also mentioned about the thickness of different gray matter regions. So one important question is that, so if somebody performs these practices for longer time, whether we'll see more change. So there is some weak evidence there, as you can see in that graph. So in x-axis, you can see the duration of that practice. So as you go towards the right-hand side, you can see the numbers increases. So it starts above 0, it goes up to 120 months, basically 10 years of practice. So they had some participants. So you can see, as the people who have performed more this kind of practice, they have some brain regions which is more thicker. So that is another interesting aspect. So as you perform more, probably brain changes more. Gray matter, yes, gray matter. Gray matter. So we are till now talking about the gray matter only. Gray matter, yes. Thickness and volume, both for gray matter. Skull size is no. Skull size also are not same. Like the total brain volume are not same. So when I will compare this group versus this group, so we'll have to normalize the individual brain areas with the total brain volume, because otherwise maybe I will be comparing some big brain versus small brain. So to control for that, we'll have to do that. Yes. So basically, then other areas, yeah. So basically, it is called reorganization. Reorganization. Yeah. So yes, some studies you can detect that. In later, I will show it is not. Yeah. So no, here they have not reported that, because sometimes the reporting bias is there. We only just some people only. Yeah. So, but so the thing is that, so Maharaj asked that some brain areas has increased. So as we have a fixed skull, so if some areas volume has increased, so what happened to other brain regions? So of course, this is a reorganization process. So if some areas volume increase, something else happened to other brain areas to accommodate that change. But here they have not reported, so that volume loss or the reduced volume of other areas was not reported here. So, but here I talked about earlier the neuronal pathways. So here you can see when they compared some measure of neuronal pathways, it is called fractional anisotropy, which is basically measure of integrity of the white matter tract. So if those values are higher, so integrity of those communication channels, those white matter pathways, they are better. So they compared this integrity of those white matter pathways between meditators and non-meditators. So you can see yellow patches where the integrity of white matter has increased. Okay, so here we are not talking about volume, just some property of the white matter. So some kind of structural change has happened. So they have become better or something like that. But you can see limited number of blue patches as well. So where integrity has gone down in meditators. So we have some kind of, and those changes I have mentioned, cuneus, precuneus, ventrometrial, prefrontal cortex. Again, they are part of those default mode network I mentioned when I mentioned the results of gray matter changes. And in some regions also, the integrity has gone down, but it is not necessarily bad. Integrity going down is not necessarily bad, because I will discuss in the next slide. So the changes in the white matter pathways of the brain associated to the plastic reorganization of the brain. So brain is a plastic. Basically, the brain keeps changing. So plastic what indicates that, and which allows the adaptation of existing neuronal connections and consistent neurogenesis. Neurogenesis means basically production of new neurons. So this also happens, we know that in adulthood. So here basically the authors are trying to argue that the increase in integrity, as they have observed in certain those type of practices, probably those happen, the integrity of the white matter pathways were enhanced because the adaptation of neural connections, or even due to neurogenesis, and in order to accommodate new information and experiences. Higher integrity of the white matter pathways may imply enhanced capacity of the information flow. So basically, I talked about that electrical current flows through those neuronal pathways. So it may happen that this increase in white matter integrity in meditators help them to have more capacity to flow in more electric current through the white matter pathways, and decrease in those integrity parameter, which is called fractional anisotropy of white matter pathways, may indicate increased number of crossing fibers. So some fibers are long, they do not crisscross each other, but here more number of fibers probably got, the number of crossing of fibers probably has increased. So the blue part, blue patches, as you have seen earlier, probably not because of that, not necessarily this integrity value goes down, that means some bad process is happening, not necessarily that is true. So I said that it is important to understand how brain function changes in these practices. So here they compared using fMRI I mentioned earlier, how the brain function changes during meditation and when somebody is not performing meditation. So those yellow patches you see here, the enhanced brain activity, those neuronal firing or enhanced regional brain activity are shown in those particular areas as indicated by those yellow patches. So those are different structures of the brain which could be common in both hemisphere, like caudate, nuclei, and insula, precuneus, medial superior temporal gyrus, precentral gyrus in the left hemisphere, and some other structure on the right hand side of the brain. So here also many brain areas are there which are part of that so-called default mode network I mentioned earlier. So a set of brain areas are more highly activated during the meditation condition, or the condition which was claimed as a meditation, than during the control condition. So those are precuneus I mentioned earlier, which are most relevant. So it is already known they are related to self-relevant information, like how individuals work with content that is personally relevant to them. Basically, concentrating on the relevant content of a matter and ignoring the irrelevant content of the matter. And another area like anterior cingulate cortex, it already known that they are involved in self-regulation. That means effectively modulate. So self-regulation means our ability to effectively modulate our own behavior. And this brain regions is already known to be involved in problem solving, adaptive behavior, and all those things. So, and other brain regions where we saw more activity in the meditators, that is insula. And it is known this part of the brain, that is insula, is involved in interoception. That is monitoring the internal body states. Internal body states, very simple example could be, if I am hungry, whether I can understand I am hungry. So if I have that sense, so then I have standard amount of interoception. So if interoception is dysregulated, that can create problem. So angular gyrus, so it helps in reorienting our attention. Premotor cortex, the frontal part of the brain, we can see. So they are also in many set of active behaviors, like sensory, like the external information senses involved with the touch and all those things. They also may also have their motor processing or affective processing. Affective processing, basically the behavior which are influenced by our emotions. So you can see, so probably from these areas we can understand as these different behaviors related to different brain regions. So as meditators, we can expect they have this better abilities in context of the behaviors maintained here. So the summary is that I started the talk that, okay, we know that previously it was shown that meditation helps to improve some kind of behavior like attention. It helps to attain sustained attention. It helps to attain more pro-social behavior. So how that happened? So neuroscience says that brain will have some role. Some changes happens if somebody performs meditation. So this study was performed, as I mentioned earlier, by a group from University of Rome, La Spezia. So they basically did meta-analysis. So different type of practices, meditation, so-called meditation practices. So they summarize the result that in different types of those practices, which areas shows consistent effect. So this is the summary. So we can understand that, okay, that meditation changes some specific changes to the brain, and that's why probably we see changing our behavior. So that's it. So thank you for your attention. So let me know if you have any question. Chat box
Sir,
any question?
sir, the meditation practice improve the dopamine level of brain.
Yes, it was reported earlier that in plasma. So I know one study where they studied the dopamine level in plasma. So I do not know whether there is a definite proof of that, but it is often hypothesized, at least I can say, that increase the dopamine level, and that could be related to ultimately. Here I talked about the brain structure and function. Of course, dopamine is a very prominent neurotransmitter. Okay, so if you want to go to another level, want to link the molecule with the structure and function, then dopamine will be the, of course, the most prominent candidate.
Sir, I have a question.
Please go ahead.
Okay. The thickness, curvature, or structure changes in white matters. Okay. So, sir, in which mental condition or in which thinking process, that is integrity, feel of integrity, feel of honesty, this may change, or one-pointedness meditation. How we can understand that the structure is, say, thickness will change by thinking like that. Curvature will change by thinking like that. Is there any type of regulation, sir?
Okay, so you, if I understood your question correctly, you are asking that how do we understand the meditation change this structure or whatever? Is that you are asking?
Okay, no? Okay.
Yes. So I mentioned something. So here, from this study, we can say that these changes in those structures are associated with this meditative practice or the protocols they have mentioned. But there is a small caveat, because the best way to study is that you recruit some people and you scan them and they undergo training for some time. Then after, when you decided that they had enough training, you scan them again. Now you compare their structure or function or whatever you are interested in. Okay. Here, if you see change, then definitely you can say, is that person undergone meditation. So this is called, basically, there is a specific term, it's called randomized control study. So if there is study like that, we can say with full confidence that yes, meditation is changing that. But here, these studies which summarize there, they are not done in that way, unfortunately. But here we can see that those changes are associated with the meditation. So I will not use the word causing the changes of the structure or function. I will say these changes are associated with practices. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Is there any other question?
If we are sleeping long hours, then is it possible to even rest and have a meditate at some regular intervals?
So basically what happens, sleep helps us to, somebody asked about the sleep deprivation and whether meditation will be useful and all those things. So what sleep does, basically it helps us to rejuvenate our brain. So meditation also has some positive effect on the brain. So of course, I would expect that, yeah, meditation will be helpful in this context.
Sleep is also biological.
Yeah.
So I guess sleep cannot be like a substitute. So sleep is also given by nature. Meditation is also something we learn from nature. We cannot substitute one with other. Sleep is a very important thing. Not only it refreshes our mind, it rejuvenates the body. So like body cells and systems, they all get corrected. So it is very essential. Sleep deprivation, perhaps food can be, we can go without food, but going without sleep is possibly not a good idea and cannot be done. And the other thing is, for a proper meditation, you need a good sleep, because this, keeping the mind alert, focused, and all those things, without sleep, I think it's very difficult to do. Like, even if we try, we will doze off. So meditation, proper meditation, true meditation, like holding the mind somewhere, is not possible if we are too much sleep deprived.
Thank you, Maharaj. So do you have more questions?
Sir,
Okay.
sir, so meditation improve the level of melatonin. Otherwise, if it is improving, it is useful for insomnia.
Melatonin level.
Insomnia.
Insomnia.
If meditation is improving melatonin, is it helpful in insomnia?
Okay. Insomnia, I am not aware whether it is helpful for insomnia, but I understand the reasoning you are following. So I will also like to check what happens. It's a very interesting question. Any more questions? Thank you for your time. Thank you very much. All right.